Last episode, we exposed how Hitler's economic miracle was actually a Ponzi scheme that required constant war and theft to function. Now let's head east to the Soviet Union, where another mustachioed dictator was running his own absolutely unhinged management experiment. Spoiler! It involved murdering 90% of your military leadership right before the biggest war in history. Alright, let's head east to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where the workers supposedly owned the means of production. But in reality, one Paranoia Georgian with a spectacular mustache owned literally everything, including whether you gotta keep breathing. Meet Joseph Stalin birth, name Iosif Jugashvili. But he changed it to Stalin, which means Man of Steel, because apparently he thought he was a Marvel superhero instead of a mass-murdering bureaucrat. If Hitler was the edgy teenager screaming manifestos into the void, Stalin was the middle manager from hell who turned workplace toxicity into a governing philosophy and made trust issues into an art form. Stalin's approach to leadership can be summarized as, what if we took paranoia, multiplied it by absolute power, and then added a complete disregard for human life? Spoiler alert. The results were catastrophic. Let's start with the Great Purge, because nothing says I am a confident leader quite like executing 90% of your military high command right before the biggest war in human history. Between 1936 and 1938, Stalin decided that his military was getting a little too competent, which apparently made him nervous. Can't have generals with actual experience and independent thoughts. They might get ideas. So AR instead tortured and executed roughly 90% of his generals and 80% of his colonels. 90%. 90%. Imagine if Amazon fired all its engineers right before Prime Day, then wondered why the website crashed and packages never arrived. That's essentially what Stalin did to the Red Army. He replaced experienced military leaders with terrified yes-men whose primary qualification was Hasuna been shot, yet their strategic expertise was limited to agree with Stalin and don't get arrested. It was the corporate restructuring from the ninth circle of hell, and it was about to cost the Soviet Union millions of lives. The purges weren't limited to the military, by the way. Stalin purged the Communist Party itself, the government bureaucracy, industrial managers, scientists, artists, writers, and basically anyone who might pose even a theoretical threat to his power. The total death toll from the Great Purge is estimated at around 750,000 to 1.5 million people executed, with millions more sent to the Gulag, the Soviet forced labor camp system that makes modern prison systems look like wellness retreats. And we're not even in World War II yet. This is just Stalin's peacetime hobby, murdering his own people because he was afraid they might be more competent than him. It is like if your boss fired everyone who was good at their job because their competence made him feel insecure, except your boss also has secret police who will drag you from your home at 3 a.m. and make you disappear. Now, let's talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, because this is where Stalin's cynicism reaches truly breathtaking levels. Picture this. It's August 1939. Hitler has spent years screaming about how communism is the ultimate enemy and how Germany needs to destroy the Soviet Union. Stalin has spent years positioning the USSR as the anti-fascist bulwark against Nazi aggression. These two ideologies are theoretically incompatible. Communism and fascism are supposed to be mortal enemies. So naturally, they signed the Non-Aggression Pact and secretly agreed to carve up Eastern Europe like two mob bosses dividing territory. It was the most spectacular "the enemy of my enemy is my 08. He's still my enemy" moment in modern history. The public part of the pact said Germany and the USSR wouldn't attack each other. The secret protocol, which both sides denied existed until after the war, divided Poland, the Baltic states, and parts of Romania between them. It was imperialism with extra steps. Colonialism dressed up in diplomatic language. Two dictators shaking hands over the corpses they were planning to create. Stalin thought he was playing for dimensional chess. He figured, I'll buy some time, grab some territory, and let the capitalist powers fight each other while I prepare. What he actually did was give Hitler a free hand to start World War II without worrying about a two-front war. It was the strategic equivalent of giving your opponent a loaded gun and assuming they definitely won't shoot you because you have a signed piece of paper saying they won't you, and and the Soviet Union immediately started implementing their side of the deal. They invaded eastern Poland in September 1939, just weeks after Germany invaded from the west. They annexed the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in 1940. Through a combination of military intimidation and rigged elections, they attacked Finland in the Winter War, expecting an easy victory, and instead got embarrassed by a much smaller army defending their homeland. The Red Army's performance was so bad that it convinced Hitler the Soviet military was weak and could be easily defeated. Thanks, Stalin. Your purges and incompetence convinced the Nazis to invade. Now we arrive at June 22nd, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. The largest military invasion in human history. 3 million German troops, along with Finnish, Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian forces, poured across the Soviet border in a surprise attack. And it was genuinely surprising to Stalin, despite the fact that multiple intelligence agencies had warned him it was coming. British intelligence warned him. Soviet spies warned him. Even some German defectors crossed the lines to warn him. Stalin's response: he had some of the people warning him arrested for spreading provocations. When the invasion finally happened, Stalin reportedly had a complete breakdown. He retreated to his dacha, his countryside villa, and didn't emerge for over a week. The man who ran the Soviet Union through terror and personality cult basically rage quit reality for 7 days while the German army demolished the Red Army. It's like if a CEO got bad news and just stopped coming to work while the company burned down. Eventually, his subordinates had to convince him to come back and, actually lead the country during the existential crisis he'd helped create. The initial losses were catastrophic. By December 1941, less than 6 months into the invasion, the Red Army had suffered 4.5 million casualties. That's almost the entirety of their pre-war standing army, gone in half a year. Entire army groups were encircled and destroyed. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured and would die in German POW camps. The Germans advanced hundreds of miles, capturing Kiev, besieging Leningrad, and pushing toward Moscow. Why was the Red Army so unprepared? Well, besides Stalin murdering all the competent generals, he'd also ignored all warning signs, positioned troops in offensive rather than defensive formations, because he didn't want to provoke Hitler, and created a military culture where initiative was punished and following orders, even suicidal orders, was the only way to avoid being shot by your own side. But here's where we need to talk about something Soviet historians would really prefer you forget. Lend-Lease. The narrative you usually hear is that the glorious Soviet Union, through sheer communist willpower and the heroism of its people, single-handedly defeated Nazi Germany. And, look, Soviet soldiers did fight with incredible bravery, and the Soviet people endured unimaginable suffering. That's true, but the single-handedly part is complete fiction. Because the Soviet war effort was bankrolled by American capitalism to the tune of $10.8 billion at $194 billion in 2025 money, the United States shipped over 400,000 jeeps and trucks to the Soviet Union, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, enough food to feed an army, literally, millions of tons of food. Because the Soviet agricultural system was so dysfunctional that soldiers were starving. And yes, spam. So much is spam. American canned meat became a luxury item on the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers were eating spam like it was caviar, because compared to what the Red Army normally fed them, it basically was. Did you know that roughly 70% of Soviet truck transport during the war was American-made? Those iconic images of Soviet soldiers riding into Berlin, many of them got there in Studebaker trucks, powered by American gasoline, eating American rations, wearing American boots. The Great Communist Victory was sponsored by capitalist industry. The irony is so thick you could use it to stop German tanks. Soviet veterans later admitted that without Lend-Lease, they probably would have lost. Georgy Zhukov, the most celebrated Soviet general, said after the war that without American supplies, the Soviet Union couldn't have continued the war. But Soviet propaganda during the Cold War minimized or completely ignored this aid, because it ruins the narrative of communist superiority. End of people knowing that the triumph of Marxism-Leninism was powered by Ford trucks and Kansas wheat. Now let's talk about Stalin's actual military strategy, because calling it strategy is generous. His approach was essentially, throw bodies at the problem until the problem goes away, or you run out of bodies. Soviet military doctrine under Stalin valued political loyalty over competence, which meant commanders made decisions based on what Stalin wanted to hear rather than what would actually work. Retreating was forbidden, even when it was the only rational choice, because Stalin had issued Order 227. Not one step back. Anyone who retreated could be shot by NKVD. Blocking detachments positioned behind Soviet lines. Yes, the Soviet Union had soldiers whose job was to shoot their own soldiers if they tried to retreat. Your choices as a Soviet soldier were die from German bullets in front of you, or die from Soviet bullets behind you. It was the ultimate hostile work environment, and I mean that literally. Imagine if your company had security guards whose job was to shoot you if you tried to quit. That was the Red Army. Stalin also loved penal battalions, Strafbats units, composed of soldiers who'd been convicted of crimes like retreating, cowardice, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These men were sent on suicide missions, clearing minefields by walking through them. Frontal assaults on fortified positions. Basically any task where high casualties were expected. It was a death sentence with extra steps, but it allowed Stalin to claim he was giving people a chance to redeem themselves with blood. How generous! The siege of Leningrad stands as one of the most horrific events of the entire war, and a perfect example of Stalin's priorities. The siege lasted 900 days, nearly 2.5 years. German and Finnish forces surrounded the city, cutting off supplies. The population of Leningrad was roughly 2.9 million people when the siege began. By the end, over 630,000 civilians had died of starvation and disease. That's 22% of the city's population. People ate wallpaper paste, leather belts, sawdust mixed with flour, anything that might provide calories. There are documented cases of cannibalism. The dead were left in the streets because no one had the strength to bury them. It was a medieval nightmare happening in the 20th century. And Stalin's priority was defending Leningrad as a symbolic city. It was named after Lenny. After all, rather than evacuating civilians who could have been saved. Meanwhile, Stalin was in Moscow, safely away from the front lines, micromanaging military operations he didn't understand, purging officers who brought bad news, and generally making every situation worse through his paranoia and incompetence. He trusted Hitler more than his own intelligence services. He trusted his own judgment more than experienced military commanders. He valued loyalty more than ability, and the Soviet people paid the price in blood. The total cost of World War II for the Soviet Union was approximately 27 million dead. 27 million. Let that number actually sink in. That's roughly the entire population of Texas dying in 4 years. That's not a victory, that's a demographic catastrophe that took generations to recover from. And while some of those deaths were inevitable given Nazi Germany's genocidal intentions, many were the direct result of Stalin's incompetence, paranoia, and disregard for human life. Stalin's purges left the Red Army leaderless. His pact with Hitler gave Germany the confidence to start the war. His refusal to prepare for invasion despite clear warnings led to catastrophic initial losses. His not one step back orders and blocking detachments murdered Soviet soldiers who were trying to survive. His political commisses interfered with military decisions, getting soldiers killed for ideological reasons. His insistence on holding certain cities for symbolic reasons cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But here is the thing that really needs to be said. The Soviet people won World War II despite Stalin, not because of him. The soldiers who fought, the workers who produced weapons in factories, the partisans who fought behind German lines, the civilians who endured occupation and starvation, they're the ones who deserve credit. Stalin's contribution was creating obstacles they had to overcome, while also fighting the Nazis. And let's not forget, while Stalin was demanding absolute loyalty and sacrifice from the Soviet people, he was perfectly willing to sacrifice them for his own power. After the war, Soviet POWs who'd been captured by the Germans, men who'd survived concentration camps and forced labor, were interrogated by the accused of being traitors or spies, and many were sent to the Gulag. They fought for their country, got captured, survived hell, and came home to be punished for not dying. That was Stalin's Soviet Union, a place where survival itself could be considered treason. So the next time someone tries to romanticize the glorious Soviet war effort, remember the full picture. A paranoid dictator who crippled his own military, made a devil's bargain that enabled World War II, ignored warnings of invasion, caused catastrophic losses through incompetence, ran a meat-grinder military strategy that treated soldiers as expendable resources, and then took credit for a victory that was won despite him and with massive American material support. There are no heroes in this story, only survivors, and the dictator who betrayed them while pretending to lead them. Stalin didn't save the Soviet Union from Nazi Germany. The Soviet people saved themselves, and millions died because Stalin made it harder. But you know what? At least Stalin was honest about being a paranoid dictator. Now let's cross the Atlantic and talk about the good guys, the Allies, who definitely weren't doing anything morally questionable while fighting fascism. That is part 5. America and the Allies, where we expose how American corporations sold fuel to the Nazis, how the US was 93% opposed to entering the war until Pearl Harbor, and how the arsenal of democracy was also the arsenal of profit. Plus, Japanese internment camps, segregated military, and Churchill letting 3 million Indians starve. Good times. Click part 5 right now, or check the playlist. Subscribe because we're exposing everyone's dirty secrets in this war, and nobody gets out clean. Hit that notification bell or miss the remaining episodes. Comment. Do you think Stalin's paranoia and incompetence costs more Soviet lives than Hitler's invasion? Let's debate. Support at kofi.com/midnightmemehistorian. Your coffee equals more dictators getting roasted. Part 5. USA and Allies coming up next. Watch it now.